In the glowing firmament rode the long, baseless triangles of the swans, sweeping across the upper air in exalted and unswerving flight, spanning a continent with the speed of the wind, their forms glistening like silver in the sunset glow. They presented the most impressive spectacle of bird life in North America. Edward Howe Forbush.
Once, that impressive spectacle, those long baseless triangles, those glistening silver forms were a part of Wisconsin, too. But the bird whose image became synonymous with beauty, whose movements defined the word graceful, would be selfishly plucked from our landscape, for our comfort, for our table, for our own adornment. Once found in lakes and marshes throughout the Midwest, by the late 1800s, the trumpeter swan was gone from our state as a breeding bird. Gone, but certainly not forgotten.
For any endangered species that has disappeared from an area because of past mistakes that human beings made, we ought to feel that we have an obligation to correct past wrongs. And in the case of the trumpeter swan, we made a terrible mistake by over-harvesting them, by not being careful about regulating the hunting during the 19th century. It was a tragedy that the trumpeter swan was lost from Wisconsin and the Midwest, but it was a mistake that we could reverse.
In the 1980s, attempts to achieve that reversal would begin in earnest. Biologists from Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan had seen recovery efforts initiated for other bird species: eagles, osprey, peregrine falcons. Why not the trumpeter swan? The Wisconsin Recovery Plan called for building a migratory and breeding population of at least 20 pairs by the year 2000. But how to begin?
Late in 1984, there was a lot of interest in restoring some of the species in the state that had been extirpated or lost from the state, and the trumpeter swan was one of them. We had to commit to a 10-year project, so it was long-term, but it really seemed like the right thing to do ecologically and socially for the state and for the whole concept of wildlife management. Well, the trumpeter swan was one where techniques and approaches had been worked out in other states, and it was, the timing was kind of right to seriously think about this. And again, it was part of this, I would say, ethic and philosophy of the state that when and where feasible, we would help to reestablish species that had been lost from the state, and feeling that we're putting back a piece of biodiversity, a piece of our wildlife heritage and history in this state.
If you're going to start from scratch and try to reintroduce a population of birds, you need to have a large enough number of birds to reintroduce, and those birds have to be of good quality. So quantity and quality of birds for reintroduction. The quantity was largely not a problem. We had eggs available from wild populations in Alaska, so we were able to have a significant number of young birds to work with each year during their reintroduction effort.
It was the great Expedition, but to get the program off the ground, first they'd need wings.
Initially, we asked former Governor Thompson if we could use his plane to fly to Alaska. And the governor said, gee, the plane was kind of tied up during those weeks when we had to get there to get the eggs. But he'd see what he could do. And he got on the phone and he called his friend Terry Kohler.
That was a telephone call from the governor, who I've known for a long, long time. And he said, Terry, he said, we're trying to get trumpeter swans back in the state of Wisconsin. He said, but we have to fly these eggs down from Alaska. How'd you like to do that with your plane? And I said, when do we leave?
Well, they'd leave when the time was best to find birds with viable eggs on the nest. And in Alaska, that would be June. The first trip was in 1989, but the Kohler's plane, which was built for the long haul, wouldn't do for short hops between small Alaskan lakes. Enter biologist and ace floatplane pilot Rodney Sky King.
Rod King had found the nests before that and monitored after, so that we knew that we weren't damaging the local population. That was all part of the grand experiment, whether that taking these eggs for the downstate projects would actually impact those. So Rod King would find the nests first, fly us there, help us collect the eggs, and then come back later and monitor the productivity in each of those nests.
We come back in the fall after the birds have hatched and the brood are raised, and it doesn't seem to matter whether they start out with 5, 6, or 2. It seems like they, a lot of times the average is about 3 is what they end up raising. So is this the one you're going to want to use?
The day of egg collection would begin in late morning. Rod would fly into one of those places where he'd seen swans nesting and taxi right up to the nest.
Ooh, these look good.
Collecting 50 fresh eggs per trip could be challenging, sometimes due to high water and sometimes from the high-spirited occupants of those nests.
She may be an older pen, and she's probably raised young here quite a bit. The other part may be that the eggs are real close to hatching, and she may, once they get fairly close to hatching, then they're really drawn to protect the nest because they know just a few more days and they're going to be out of here.
Each egg was candled by DNR biologists Sumner Madison or Randy Jurowitz to check for viability.
We got keepers here.
Those potentially live eggs were given a letter and number that corresponded to their collection location and would identify the bird's origins. Then the eggs were placed in a small suitcase and moved to the float plane. Here they'd have first-class seats warmed by hot water bottles. Keeping those eggs at mama temperature, between 92 and 97 degrees during the return flight, was the goal.
We're very happy that one of the companies that Terry Kohler is associated with, the Volrath company, developed a mobile incubator because initially we were trying to keep these eggs warm using hot water bottles. And it was a real pain to monitor the temperature inside the egg crates, and they would stay high, and then all of a sudden they would really start dropping down as the hot water bottles just lost their heat. And we started to stage our return trips based on the water temperature in the janitor rooms in the airports because we wanted to get the absolute hottest water we could to start with.
Next stop, an incubator at the Milwaukee County Zoo.
We really got involved at the Milwaukee County Zoo in probably in middle 1986. Sumner Madison called me and told me about this great new program that the Wisconsin DNR was initiating to restore trumpeter swans in the state of Wisconsin. And it was a natural match, so we thought we'd give it a go. We realized that the zoo really had some things that could contribute to this, and at least initially it started out mostly in our ability to do captive management of swans, egg hatching, cygnet rearing, and release.